Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Chris Tapp from the Cold Stairs. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Hey, it's good to talk to you. You got the new album coming out, lots of stuff going on. But as we often say on this show, every musician's journey starts somewhere. And where was that somewhere for you?
My first foray into music was whenever I was about 4 years old. I used to, my parents would leave me at my grandparents all the time, and my grandfather used to watch the Lawrence Welk show, and he also loved to watch Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Lee Lewis, because I guess they were cousins. There was a piano show that they both were on, and I saw that whenever I saw them playing piano whenever I was young over at his house. And I told him, I said, I want to learn how to play piano. And he didn't have a piano there, but he was such a sweetheart. He goes, okay. And my dad took me over there a couple of weeks later, and my granddad had bought a piano at his house. And so I started taking piano lessons whenever I was 4 and did that until I was about 13. But as far back as I can remember, I've always been writing music and been working on music.
Yeah, well, the Jimmy Swaggart experience, one thing I noticed in your music, there's a lot of spirituality, to it. Sometimes right up front, sometimes it's just kind of in the lyrics. Was that the earliest input that you would have as far as incorporating that in your songwriting?
Yeah, we had, of course, I also went to church with my grandparents whenever I was a kid, and but my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, was in Dixon, Kentucky, about 30 minutes from us, and I would stay down there with her some and go to church with her as well. And man, they had some really good music at her church, and it was old school, but also where I grew up in Kentucky. I was about 15 minutes from where the Everly Brothers were. A lot of singers and songwriters around that area, and a lot of gospel influence. So it's just naturally, I didn't write a whole lot of that until we were in this band. But this band, we kind of started out by just writing stuff that we felt that was really natural, So just kind of naturally crept its way in, and also the guys that I really admired once I started playing guitar, a lot of the old Delta guys, Son House and Blind Willie Johnson, and those fellas always had some kind of gospel kind of blended in there. So it felt really good to just have that around.
Yeah. Well, when did you start playing guitar, since that's obviously your focus these days?
Yeah, whenever I was 13, man, I was playing keyboard in a band with some other guys, and I started noticing all the girls were paying attention to the guitar player, and so I got off the keyboards and bought a guitar. Got a guitar for my 13th birthday. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
I'll tell you, you mentioned songwriting. One of the hallmarks of Cold Stairs, riffs and grooves. So when you're writing, do you start with a riff, with a groove, and then lyrics, or do the lyrics kind of come first and you write music to fit the words that you've composed?
About 75% of the time it starts with music, and then the music kind of inspires a visual in my head of what a story would be around that, or or a lyric. The other 25% of the time, I just have something that comes to me, and it's already kind of a song in my head before I pick up the guitar. In the Nighttime, off the record before this, was one of those. I wrote that in the line waiting to pick up my kid from school. It just kind of was in my head. And sometimes that happens, and you're like, that must be it must be a song I heard, or it must be something else. But I've learned to pay attention and have that antenna up, so that when those songs do come, I've got a million voice messages on my phone of me trying to capture that when it comes. So
what's the most unusual inspiration that you've had for coming up with a song or a riff or groove or what have you?
Well, kind of been all over the place. I've written so many songs about heartache and just dark times because of a lot of different things from my past. But after you do a few records, it's like you don't want to sing about that all the time. So we try to dive some different stuff. In the Nighttime off of Heavy Shoes was written about St. Augustine, Florida. My wife and I like to go down there a lot, and we were down there one time, and a tour guide told us that basically the whole city was a cemetery because the Spanish had killed so many people, and then they had plague through there. They just buried everybody, and then they built the city on top of that, which I thought was kind of cool, and it kind of made that song spring up. But the new record, I kind of tackle everything from the loss of my granddad to end of the world stuff, and even a love song with the Joy. So it's kind of all over the place. Probably the first record that's really all over the place.
Yeah. Well, talking records, you guys did 4 self-released records. What's it like? What's the difference between making those records and then once you got signed to a deal, which is a story unto its own, I understand. So,
Not a whole lot of difference, to be honest. The first record was a self release. Heavy Shoes we did with Small Stone Records, so we had a little bit of input with them. But Scott, the guy that runs that label, I asked him, I said, "Well, do you want to hear some demos of the record?" And he goes, "No, I signed you because I like everything you do. Just go make your record." So he was great. And then, Ways we self produced, but we had that with Anti Fragile Records. And Tom, the guy that runs that label, is kind of the same way. He was manager for Lou Reed, and he kind of worked with a lot of different people. But I think his approach too was if I'm into what you're doing, then just do the best job you can. Mascot has been great about that as well. So I think more the relationship with Mascot, our current record label, is more if there's any kind of conflict, it's on how often music should be released, because I just feel like now in 2023, if you're not releasing something, at least a song or something every couple months, you very quickly can get slid underneath the rug on Spotify and stuff. The music industry and just the way that things are released and consumed in the last probably since COVID and the lockdowns has really rapidly changed, because when bands couldn't tour, and that's the only way to kind of reach your fans was releasing new music. So, but
yeah.
Mascot's been fantastic and supportive in the same way. Usually um, we'll send them, if we're making a record with 10 or 12 songs on it, we'll send them a record or send them 15 or 18 songs and really take their input and try to curate it down. And if there's something that I'm super adamant about leaving on the record or having on the record, they're usually easy to negotiate that out with. So we made wise choices with record labels, and we've had a really good run with the labels that we've been with.
Well, that's nice to hear because you hear so many stories about meddling from record label people who really aren't music people.
Yeah.
And you want to throw their 2 cents in and try to tell the artist how they should be doing their music. It's just like,
Well,
no.
I'll tell you, when we signed a production deal with Martin Edom in 2012, and so when you do that, he pays for the recording of the music, and then he goes out and tries to find your record deal. And if he gets your record deal, then he gets a percentage of the deal. And we had Virgin Records, we had Hollywood Records, which is owned by Disney. We had all these people flying in to see us play. And that was the first time I'd had a conversation with Mascot, was back then. But a couple of the labels, we had one label that these were big money deals as far as recording the record. So the budget was a lot more than what we currently have, was big money, but we knew we would never recoup any of that money. because if the label's going to pay $75,000 for the record to be made, and then our guy gets $50,000, if we're splitting 25, it takes a lot of streams and a lot of albums sold to be able to recoup that. So after we did the math and kind of talked with our lawyers, it just we ended up passing on a deal. One of those labels wanted to know why one of the songs had a religious overtones or spiritual overtones, and they weren't about it. And I put them out really quick. I'm fine to discuss some things, but I wasn't going to be told what we could put on and what we couldn't. But the way that things are structured now with our record label and the deals that we've had has been less money up front and a reasonable. We try to make the best album we can at a reasonable budget so that we all can make money on the back end versus the way the big labels do it. They throw a lot of money up front, and if you don't make that money, then you're dropped or you're stuck. And we didn't want to be in that situation.
Well, with a few exceptions, I have a theory that nobody who wears this suit should dictate music.
I would be on board with that. I agree with that. Now I'll tell you something else. Early on, the record labels that Mark brought in, we literally would be in discussions. Matt Harris was the guy that was at Hollywood Records. So Disney owns that. And that was a really good label, we thought at the time. They flew in to see us play. We had a sold out show, and we just knocked him out, and we left. We had dinner afterwards. He goes, "You guys, I'm going to make you a record offer." He says, "I'm going back to LA and I'm going to get a record offer." Well, he goes back to LA. We didn't hear from him for like a week or something. When we finally get a hold of him, he'd been fired. And we were in LA a couple months later, and we were in LA for 2 weeks. So the time we got to LA, we were talking with one A&R person. By the time we left, we were talking with another A&R person because they had gotten fired. The turnover was, they literally would hire somebody and expect them to find the Beatles or they would be gone, immediately. So it was horrible. It's horrible.
That's where it comes down to the difference between music and the music business.
Yes.
Music's wonderful. The business side of it, frequently not so much.
I agree.
Yeah. I'll tell you, to kind of step back for a moment, for your guitar playing, influences, who were the players that have had the biggest impact on you?
Well, early on, I was very fortunate and blessed because this band, if I was playing the music that I was surrounded by when I was growing up, we would be more like a Pearl Jam or a Soundgarden, or that was the kind of music that took off whenever I was young. I had the good fortune of my next door neighbor was also my god brother, my parents' best friends, and he was 10 years older than me, but his brother was 10 years older than him. So I would go over, and in his room on the wall, he had posters of like Ted Nugent and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and Bruce Lee. And because he inherited his older brother's bedroom and thought that stuff was cool and left it there. So when everybody around me was listening to that stuff, I was going over there and listening to Zeppelin and Ted Nugent and Free and those bands. And none of my friends listened to any of that stuff. The other thing that happened around that time was my best friend started playing guitar, and he could shred. This kid, he's an engineer now, but at the time he picked up guitar, and like 3 or 4 months later, he was playing like Yngwie type stuff. And I realized then, I thought, you know what, I'm not ever going to catch up to him. So what I need to do is, I had the wisdom at that time to go, how do I become something that's somewhat unique? Because that's the only way that I'm going to do this. So when everybody else was also playing, grunge or whatever else, I was more focused on songwriting and listening to Dylan and Led Zeppelin and just trying to structure riffs and songs. Because I also understood at that point that people didn't buy records for solos, they bought records for songs. And so the guys that really influenced me were also great songwriters. Jimmy Page, it's hard not to say Jimmy Page, but Clapton, all those guys from that era, and guys in the last 10 or 15 years that are a little bit more under the radar, but still, they use the instrument as a songwriting tool more than just a solo on it. But you know, I loved everything from Eddie Van Halen to, you know, I love a lot of the stuff that's not necessarily an influence on me, but was inspiring to me.
What would one of those, you know, inspirational artists or players or what have you that people might be surprised had a big impact on you?
Um, I mean, I don't think that they would be surprised about the early blues guys. Um, I don't know. You know, I really love like I love all kinds of music. Other than the modern country stuff, I don't do as much, but traditional country stuff, I loved all those traditional guys, Buck Owens and his band, and I loved all those country guys. I also loved jazz, and I loved Wes Montgomery, and I think the thing that can make you unique as an artist, and especially a guitar player, is absorbing some different stuff. If you just listen to, you know, if I just listened to Jeff Beck all the time, then I'd sound like about a 20% Jeff Beck ripoff, you know. But if I'm listening to Wes Montgomery and Jeff Beck and Django and you know, then you can have a little bit more. Even when I try to play something that sounds like, you know, Mike Campbell from Tom Petty, it doesn't sound like that because I have so many other influences in there. So, but yeah, man, I admire really anybody that's proficient on the instrument because it's such a beautiful instrument to kind of learn. It's so imperfect that I think it kind of mirrors who we are as humans. You know, it's not an instrument that's more perfect like the piano. The guitar is a flawed thing, and I think in that being it flawed, it allows you to create your own identity a little bit easier.
Yeah. You mentioned Buck Owens, the Buckaroos. What's
Oh
your
man,
favorite
love it.
Buck song?
You know, we did a cover of Santa Looked a Lot Like Daddy for a Christmas album last year, and I love all his records. That's another thing that my granddad listened to and had the 8 tracks. And you know, I remember Hank Williams Jr. and some of that was on the radio, and it didn't really turn my crank. And then I heard Buck Owens, and I heard, you know, Don Rich and those guys, and I was like, what, why is this so much different than what everybody else calls country? So, but it's funny. The record label said, "Hey, we're doing a Christmas record." You know, everybody else on our label most everybody else is heavier than us, and when they asked for songs, you know, we did the version of the Buck Owens song. So I knew it would kind of throw a wrench into everybody else's versions of songs, but it was a great opportunity to play something, yeah, that somebody else might not know that I love, that I do love.
Yeah. Tell you, to me, his Carnegie Hall concert album is about
Yeah,
as perfect a live performance album as you can get.
yeah. Vocals are just amazing, and a great example of somebody that doesn't sing like Mariah Carey, but has a quality to their voice that's very unique. You know, nobody sounds like Buck, and you know, I loved it, and that's, you know, it's a big influence on me too. I try there's influences that I try to show, whether it's Paul Rogers or a couple guys that I really like, that I want the listener to go, okay, I can kind of see where he's coming from. But those guys, Mark Lanigan, another example, Johnny Cash, these guys are not natural singers; they're vocalists. You know, they create something that you can hear their identity, and that's what I've always tried to do anyway.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's the character, you know, in those vocals that sets it
Yeah,
apart. You know, y- somebody can be a technically perfect singer. That doesn't mean there's going to be emotion to it. You can be technically
yeah,
perfect and be totally soulless.
right.
And there's a few vocalists who've done quite well for themselves who, in my opinion, fall into that category. Yeah.
I totally agree. It's kind of like politicians. You know, they can speak eloquently, and they can tell you something in a language that might be eloquent, but if it doesn't have a meaning, then you can have somebody that maybe doesn't speak as well that can say something that's very profound. So I think of I think of all these things as kind of crossing borders, and I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one of the other hallmarks of the Cold Stairs records, you'd been a two piece up until the current record to the new one coming out next week. For being a two piece, you guys have such a big, full sound. How do you manage that? How do you create, especially live?
Yeah. Early on when we first started playing, we were trying not to be a band. We just got out in another band. We'd stopped playing, and in my mind, I thought if we added a bass player, we would legitimately be a band again. So I didn't want to do that. But we had some good fortune, and we got a couple shows as a duo. And I wasn't a fan of the White Stripes and the Black Keys, and the fact that they didn't have the bass live. It bothered me. I miss the bass. There's a reason why it's there. So I created a guitar rig that would allow me to play the bass and the guitar together, which was 3 amps and a bunch of pedal switching that would bring in different octaves. I would use 3 or 4 octaves live, and then I always explain it to the sound guy that we are AC/DC Highway to Hell. So the verse doesn't have the bass, but then the bridge might kick in another guitar, and then the chorus would have the bass. So it would create a lot of dynamics. And the other thing it would do is we wouldn't have had a whole lot of the preconceived notions when we walked on stage. It's just two guys, and then we'd sound like 3 or 4 guys, and it would be powerful. And that really helped us gain a reputation for doing well live. And but it was a lot of work, man, packing around 3 amps, a full bass rig, and all the stuff it required to pull that off. And by the time we got to this record, I just wanted the doors to be open to be able to write some stuff that I didn't have to worry about trying to pull off live. And I knew Bryce could play and free me up to play guitar solos and some other stuff. So we had a good run of being a duo. And, I think if we had done that in a time that the White Stripes and the Black Keys weren't out, we might have really, really taken off, because we were doing something that not really, Local H is the only other band that I had seen do something similar, but it was much different than what we were doing. But, when we added the bass player, Brian was adamant against it at first, and he thought it might detract from people seeing us live and going, wow, it's a lot of sound for two guys. But now people come up to us and say, man, you guys sound like 4 or 5 guys with three people. So I don't think it's hurt us at all, and it's definitely added a creative spark to my writing, having three.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, ask you if it opened up new avenues, songwriting wise, being able to get into styles and maybe depth musically that you weren't able to before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that the whole album, Voices as an album, is just the thought of different songs having different vocals or different voices, instead of all being confined by the 2-piece thing. Now that we're a 3-piece, there's times that I can strum a chord and just let it hold and actually sing or do something different. But before, if I stopped playing, it sounded like the whole band just lost power. So yeah, it's changed that quite a bit. And this record was the first experience of writing for a 3-piece. And it allowed us to kind of explore some of the next record even more so, because now we're really super comfortable as a 3-piece. So we're excited about the future and of being a 3-piece as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, before we get into the new album, Sleeps with Lions was used in the TV series. How did that come about? Because that opened up a whole new, avenue for you for people to find out about you.
Man, we were really lucky, really blessed with that one, because I knew nothing about licensing and syncs, and I'd heard bands that I liked, or I heard a commercial and would go, oh, well, whose song is that? That's cool. I didn't know anything about that world, and we had put together some music after the first record, and we met a guy named Jerry Pilato who reached out and just said, "Hey, I work for this company and we do licensing for music, and I really feel like you have some songs that would be great for that, you know." And he said, "Well, it can be quite lucrative, if you get your songs on TV and whatever else." So we were all for it. Well, he listened to some songs that we hadn't released yet, and "Sleeping with Lions" was one of them. And he goes, "Man, I feel like this is a song that's going to end up on TV or something." I said, "Man, I don't. It's kind of a biblical reference. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's going to be the case or not." But he was right, man, and he got that. His company is Indie Orange, and they got that song in TNT Animal Kingdom. And then after it hit that, we had a string of licenses around that time that included ESPN, Monster Energy, X Games, and really started doing well with placing those songs. And then from that period forward, after I got a little bit of understanding about how that industry worked, we've stayed at it. And then we had Dodge commercial, we had the Chevy truck commercial all last year. So about 6 or 8 months, if you'd be watching a football game, you would hear our song John. And we landed the Keanu Reeves video game Cyberpunk, which really was the biggest one we've done so far. So that's as a musician, people ask often, how do you make a living doing that, because album sales are really gone. And other than touring, licensing and syncs, is an opportunity for you to make a little bit of money and keep your band afloat if you can work those opportunities. But for every 1,000 that you put in, you might get one. It's a lot of hustle. It's not for if you're not willing to work 10, 12 hours a day on some of that stuff, it's hard to get.
Yeah. Well, what was it like the first you're watching the game and all of a sudden commercial comes up and you're hearing yourself?
You can have 1,000 people tell you that you're good at a show, or that you're their favorite band, or that whatever. You can even have your validation from your dad or whatever else. There's not anything that's like seeing your song in a movie or a film or TV commercial. We told everybody that we had that Chevy commercial. We tried to on social media. Hey, if you see the truck commercial, Truck Month, it's us. But invariably, every football game, I would get texts and somebody would say, "Hey, somebody stole your sound, man. I heard this song. It sounds just like you guys. It's on a Chevy truck commercial." I'm like, "Dude, we've told everybody. We've basically, broadcasted on a billboard that we've gotten these songs on here." So it's great. The validity that you might have as a band in the 70s by having a record deal and being successful was more financial than I think. And it's hard to define success as a band now. But that is one of the things that I think is easily, on the radar for success now, is if you can get a couple of those things. So like I said, we've been extremely blessed to have those opportunities.
Well, what's interesting, since it's hard for bands to break through on the radio because the playlists are just so ridiculously restrictive. Personally, I find myself finding more new music in bands from TV commercials than when I do the radio.
Yeah. Radio's dead, man. It's just, the only thing that looks good to me on radio anymore is XM. It's so hard to get, there's just not a format for a band like us that's a little rock, but a little bluesy. We have songs that obviously are somewhat catchy, or they wouldn't be in the TV and the video games, but there's not radio stations set up for that. Our local radio stations here are so bad. They are still playing the Scorpions and the same stuff from the 90s. That rotation has not changed in 20 years. But internet radio, we have a lot of internet radio stuff. Planet Rock over in Europe plays us a lot, and we've been really lucky with Bluesville, and really fortunate that we're in a time that the definition of what's blues is really opened up. So we have some songs on Bluesville, and But in a way, I'm kind of glad that radio died. Uh, in the fact that a lot of bands spent a lot of money trying to get songs played on the radio, and it really became a racket. Our first record, we paid $5,000-$10,000 to put a single on radio, and it's such a racket where well, you're at number 21 for $5,000 more. We can get you at 18. It's like I hate that whole, as you said earlier, the music business is just so detached from music in general. But
Well, what intrigues me is back in the 50s, you had the big payola scandal, and it was a terrible thing. And then you flash forward 50 years plus, what have you, and that's the rule. That is
yeah,
how it operates.
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and it's now found acceptable.
Yeah. Well, so you don't pay the DJ, you pay the guy that goes in and presents to the DJ. So it's crooked. And I don't want to crap on radio everywhere. Lightning 100 in Nashville, there are exceptions, and more than anything, I love that it seems like in the last couple of years, especially since COVID lockdowns and stuff, that there's a lot of small shows that are popping up on radio where they're allowing guys and girls to curate music and talk about it and stuff. So that, makes you a little bit hopeful. Sometimes it takes the building to go all the way down to the dirt to rebuild it and it make a little bit more sense. And I think maybe hopefully that's what we're seeing a little bit with radio.
Well, one of the things that, to me, each region of the country used to have its own sound. And music from Memphis sounded different than music from New York, which sounded different than Chicago, which sounded different than Detroit, which sounded different than Austin, blah, blah, blah. Now everything has become so homogenized as far as mainstream stuff, and it doesn't really matter what format. If you listen to a good chunk of top 40 country, it all sounds like 90s top 40 stuff that's had
Yeah.
a fiddle and lyrics about dirt roads, pickup trucks added to what would have been a hit for J-Lo back in 96, basically.
Journey with a banjo.
There you go. And but that regional sound has been lost. And with that, you also, whereas top 40, your radio used to play music of 5 different genres as long as it was popular. So you would have, Kool and the Gang and Dolly Parton at 1 and 2, on the top 40 chart. That's not going to happen anymore.
No, it was great. Whenever I, was talking about being 4 and 5 and playing piano, whenever I was that young, late 80s, you would have everything from hard rock stuff to Michael Jackson and Madonna and Men at Work. You had all these Genesis, you had all these bands on the top 40, and it was so less segregated. I love that time period, and it is not like that now. But what's weird is that you have, as you said, to like the Memphis sound or the Chicago sound, you have people now that they're not from those areas, but they love that specific stack sound or maybe chess records, and so you got some guy in California that you listen to and go, man, he's got that Memphis sound, but because they're really focused on that time period and that regional music, and I love that. The internet is it's one of the things that I don't like. There's a lot of things that I don't like about the internet, but that's one of the things that I don't like is that when I go to Mississippi, I like it to feel like Mississippi. I like the things in the same way with Florida, or if we're in Texas, or if we're in California, if we're in New York, I like the different languages. I like the different vocabulary. I like the different music. I like the different food. I think it's one thing that makes us beautiful as a country is that the diversity that we have and everything not being the same. The more that things become all the same, it's I just don't think that that's where we want to be as humans. It's not as nearly as interested. Everybody in our country is already trying to segregate everybody into two groups or this or that, and it's like there's so many nuances and variables as artists and as humans that we need to explore. I don't want to see that. I love that about Europe. When we're in Europe, literally going from France into Spain, it changes 5 miles into Spain. Everything looks different. People are different. The culture's different. I love that. It's beautiful.
Well, as I referred to it, the homogenization, of things, it eliminates character. Anything
Yes.
distinctive, it gets lost. And when you hear bands that are trying to appease those people running those things, they're bands without character.
Yeah.
And it amazes me. It's like, how can anybody listen to this? I want something, I want some substance to it. I want some character to it. I want something distinctive.
Yeah. A lot of people that are under 20, my son's 15, and they don't have those references. Everything that they've heard on the radio all sounds the same. They think that, the first time my kid heard Black Sabbath, he was like, what in the world is this? And it all, it's cohesive and all sounds the same. Same way as Django Reinhardt, when he heard that, so I'm with you, man. I hope that we can find a better path to preserve our history and it's not as good. I don't want spaghetti mixed with Texas chili. I like my things, separated. I love going to Memphis. We will do our next record in Memphis, and we recorded 2 other records in there. And I like it specifically because it has a vibe.
I
It's
was just going to say it's that vibe, and
yeah,
you hear it, you could feel it when it's real.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree.
We'll tell you, talk about the new record that comes out next week. Uh, you've already had some videos released from it. Uh, Nothing but the blues. Got the lyric video. That's a really cool video. The skeleton walking through. Where'd the concept for that come from?
We work with a company called 12-Inch Media out of the UK, and they are fantastic about me coming, giving them an idea and putting it together. And I just told them, I said, that musically that song, if I'm writing, um, I try not to stay. It was a little bit of a blend. I want the song to have a blues background, but if the riff is really bluesy, I don't want the vocals or the lyrics to be too bluesy. We're trying to take the blues and the blues rock stuff in a different direction. So the lyrics on that one were super bluesy. It's an old Delta blues type thing of this guy's he can't win for anything. Everything, this kid's dog shot, he loses his job. It's like, it couldn't be any more bluesy. So the guitar part, I thought, well, let's make it more of a little bit more like Led Zeppelin meets punk rock. We're trying to do something different there. So visually, I just told him, I said, hey man, the skeleton thing is cool. Let's get us a guy that just keeps on having tragedy over tragedy. And they just do it. They've done a couple. They did that video. They did Throw That Stone. They've done a couple for us now. And every time they do one, it's very few revisions. I just tell them kind of what I want and they nail it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Throw That Stone. At the beginning, I talked about having that spiritual, biblical influence in there. That one, definitely. What was the inspiration for Throw That Stone?
Well, I didn't do a gospel song on Heavy Shoes, the album before, so I knew I wanted to do one on here. And I tell you, Michael, one of the best compliments that I get sometimes, the thing that really feels good to me is a lot of times I'll have somebody come up and say, I know you're a Christian, or you have this is where you're writing that from, and that's not who I am, or that's not what I'm into. But I really like the way that you approach that in the songs, and you're not beating me over the head with it, and that's really nice to hear, because I'm turned off by people that do that, and I don't want to be like that. I'd much rather influence somebody than try to force them to do something. But I knew I wanted to do a gospel song, but I also trying to tell biblical stories that make sense to everybody. Sometimes the language and it was awesome that the parables in the Bible that broke it down and just made small stories, and then so in my mind, I love the story of all the people standing around going to stone the lady for being the lady of the night or whatever she was doing. And I just thought it was so cool that, Jesus is just like, well, go ahead, whichever you guys haven't done anything, and that have a clean slate in it. I wanted to retell that in the Old West, because I'm a lover of Western films and Old West stuff. And I just thought, during that time period when the Old West was kind of when we were becoming a country out there, I'm sure there was a lot of times that people did things that they normally wouldn't do to protect their family or to put food on the table or just to survive. And a lot of people were hung, a lot of people were put in jail, a lot of people were killed by judge and juries that probably weren't the best, or not what we strive for today. So that song is just kind of about not wanting to be that guy that pulls lays the gavel down and to do that. So just trying to tell a little bit of a story without it being shoved down somebody's throat, but just to show that some of those things are applicable to all of us if you just kind of take a look at it. I think hopefully that's something everybody can get behind, in that we all make mistakes. I don't want to be judge and jury for somebody else when we have issues ourselves. So,
Yeah. I'll tell you another track on the album. One of the things that I like is when I hear new music, that if I'm putting together a playlist, I can throw it in with a song from a different time. Come For Me, you can segue like right out of ZZ Top's first album or a track from Rio Grande Mud and right into Come For Me and have it be seamless.
yeah,
What's the
thank you.
story on that?
That's a hell of a compliment. That's what we were listening to. We were listening to early ZZ Top. We were listening to Fire and Water by Free and some Cream. And I think the goal is, that stuff's the pinnacle of blues rock stuff. And the goal is for people to listen to that and go, well, I hear those references, but it's kind of uniquely you. And so trying to wear our influences on our sleeves without being copycats. And I definitely want people to hear that we're not one of those bands that go, well, we don't listen to that. We're not trying to do that. Greta Van Fleet trying to do Led Zeppelin and then saying they listen to the Queen. I love ZZ Top. It's an honor for somebody to say that could be in the same playlist. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to carry on that music so that people that aren't familiar with that music go, hey, I like the Cold Stairs. Oh, well, I also like ZZ Top, or I like some of the other bands that we listen to. So,
What's your favorite song or two from ZZ Top?
oh gosh, man, I love especially the first three records. Funky Kings is I just adore that song. But whenever I was young, whenever I was probably 6, 7, 8 years old, my neighbor was one of my best friends, and I rode to school with him and his dad. And his dad had this 2-door, big, long ass Cadillac that was just awesome. And he had an 8-track player, and he played Manic Mechanic all the time in that car, and going. And it had that rev on the track, and he would rev his car up, and I just thought that's the coolest thing. So I love all the ZZ Top stuff, but especially those first three records. I can listen to them all day long.
Yeah, Apologies to Pearly is probably one of my favorite
Yeah,
early tracks.
so good, so good.
Yeah, and then you talk about Man Mechanic, the whole DeGuello album. Just
Yeah,
but they were also a band that wasn't stagnant,
yeah,
through those years, because you come out of the say if you look at the first album and then Tejas and then Eliminator, DeGuayo in between. That's, you know, for being all blues based, that's
Yeah.
pretty diverse.
A lot of stuff, man. That time period, there's a lot of records around that time period that are just, people are starting to try new things and do new things. Where Billy Gibbons got those vocals and his approach to singing some of that stuff. I mean, you can hear the guitar and tell where his influences are, but the vocals and the production, and that's another band that is super influential on me as far as mixing Western themes, Southwestern themes in the music, because I mean, they were great. They had cowboys coming out to see them, and hippies and rockers, and they cross platformed a lot of stuff by combining. You don't have to be a country band to have country themes or rural themes in your music. And man, they killed it with that stuff.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things, getting back to your music that's been used in TV commercials and stuff, composing for film, is that an avenue that you've ever contemplated?
I have a friend that just scored a film. Yeah, I would love to do it. All that stuff. Hopefully, and we get to a point where we're not touring anymore. Hopefully, I'm doing that full time, because I'm a lover of film and TV stuff, and would love to do that. So far, everything that we've gotten, there's only been one or two circumstances where somebody has said, "Hey, would you write a song for this situation? This is what I'm thinking, or this, we like this from your catalog. Would you do something like that?" But most of the time, they're taking stuff that I've already written and applying it to situations. But I'd love to get into an opportunity where I'm writing more specifically for something.
As a fan of film, what soundtracks, what scores, I should say, stick with you the most? If you had to say, okay, I'm going to, listen to a film score, what would be the first ones that you would turn to?
Lethal Weapon, man, it just, when I was a little kid and I saw that first Lethal Weapon movie and heard those guitar parts, at the time I didn't know it was Clapton, um, but it's just so good. It's just so good. It's blues guitar playing in through those films. Um, so I love that. I love spaghetti westerns, and so I love all the music that was coming out of Italy, and the scores that they did, and the guitar sounds, because you can hear that and immediately go, okay, well that sounds a little like surf guitar, but then it's got this western thing. So um, love those as well. Yeah, and then just a lot of the films that are more orchestral. I love to the Proposition Western movie is a fantastic movie, and I think that was done by it's not Daniel Lanois. It's I forget, but it's kind of the spaghetti western stuff mixed with, it's Nick Cave that did that. It's Nick Cave, spaghetti western stuff mixed with just some kind of brooding um, contemporary music. So I love that one too.
Well, I was going to say, I could hear you doing something, along the Morricone, good, bad, and the ugly type
So
spaghetti
great.
western
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah. So great. I've done some instrumental stuff along those lines, and I would love to do. I plan on doing some more of that. Love that stuff. It's so unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, character.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So,
what would those films be? And, those films would be so different without those music and that sound effect. Again, my kid's 15. He loves movies. He watches. Stays up on all these top 20s, and he's seen all these movies, and he loves the soundtracks for the westerns, especially Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars. Those are his favorites. So
well, it sets the tone.
yeah.
Yeah. So, well, tell me this, Chris, is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to make sure that we touch on here?
Just looking forward to seeing everybody on tour. So we have March 10th and 11th are our two release concerts. We're doing one in Nashville, one in Evansville, and then May through June we'll be in Europe. We'll be in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, France, Germany, possibly Spain. July, we'll be in the UK for the Made of Stone Festival and a tour around that. And then back in the States, August through the end of the year. And then December, we'll be back in the UK again for another tour and a festival over there. So you can check us out at thecoldstairs.com. Our social media stuff's all just the Cold Stairs. And just if we're coming to your area, we'd love to see you out at a show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell you what, I hope that you guys come through Chicago so I can come catch the show.
Yeah, we're due to be back up there. Hopefully we'll have something up there in the next couple months anyway.
Yeah, well, good deal. All right. Well, tell you what, on that note, we will bring this one to a close. Chris, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michael. Greatly appreciate it.
Hey, not a problem. Everybody, thanks for watching. Have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.